Today on Great Chat, we take a recurring theme of this podcast head on. Is venture and tech more broadly suffering from short-termism? Venture is traditionally the most patient asset class, so this feels new. Is it a bad thing? Did we do this to ourselves? I'm Helen, and this week I'm joined by Ashley, Angela, and Mac. Great Chat is brought to you by Mercury, radically different banking loved by over 300,000 entrepreneurs. We use Mercury to run this podcast and love recommending it to other founders and fund managers. It's free to get started. Try it for yourself. Visit mercury.com to learn more and apply online in minutes. Hey guys.
Hi.
Hello. Oh my gosh, full crew. I love it.
And so color coordinated. Got like the beige, white this way, the black navies that way.
I don't think we're doing a very good job with our summer palette though. Like we
because it's San Francisco.
Mac and I are both in sweaters. We're all in sweaters. What's going on?
It's cold in San Francisco, but for you guys, maybe it would be like there's too much air conditioning and you're cold.
I have a lot of AC and it's so hot outside and it's a really jarring thing. You know, like when you're in New York in the winter and it's just like inside is burning hot and outside is freezing cold. It feels like that.
Yeah. I mean, this is my, it's hot outside here, but my New York City flex is that we have central air. And so it can be cozy when I decide I want to.
Oh my God, Ashley, what's it like having it made?
Oh my gosh. I mean, really, this was in like the 3 apartments I've lived in Brooklyn, this is the best feature that you can have in my personal experience. So,
okay, guys, I need to go around. If we're talking about like the in-unit or unit features wars, I feel like it's always between like aircon and then like washer dryer in-house.
Washer dryer, 100%.
But I do think it is washer dryer.
Garbage disposal. Have you ever lived in an apartment that didn't have a garbage disposal?
I mean, that's disgusting. I would be really upset about that.
Okay, but going back to aircon units, I was in Europe for a week. Like my flex is I was in Spain for the Spain-France game, so that was very exciting. But apparently there's a massive heat wave that's been going through Europe, thank you, global warming, and a shortage of air conditioning units where people are literally trying to.
Oh yes, Angela. Twitter is all over this, as you might imagine.
Oh, is it? Okay, I was going to say, Great Chat Enterprises' new idea is we've just got to start shipping aircon units from the U.S. to Germany. You know,
this is like everyone's favorite, U.S. superiority argument.
I'm sorry, our best U.S. supremacy argument is that we have aircon. Please, no. We have so many better things. I'm sorry. We took the world out of
It's directly tied to productivity. So it's not just the AC.
Yeah.
I know, but I also feel like if we're talking about productivity, similar to like if we're talking about drinking, we're beat by a lot of other countries.
On drinking?
On both productivity and drinking.
Well, Ashley, I'm disappointed. I thought that my in-person human trafficking to Europe found us a unique idea, but of course Twitter was all over it.
Angela, I love that every time you use human trafficking, there's a cohort of listeners who've never listened before and are like, what is she talking about? And then there are regulars who are like, this is how Angela describes moving her own body across borders.
It's a choice.
It's a choice.
Yeah. So I think I was sending you guys the march in San Francisco, like the march for open source. And then that open letter has made its rounds. And I think at this point, it's been so long that it's kind of meaningless if there are new names added to it. But when I woke this morning, I opened Twitter and saw, ooh, it's more telling who isn't signing the letter. I'm like, oh my God, these things are so stupid. I mean, I think somebody wisely pointed out that just because you are not supportive of restricting it doesn't mean that you are for it, right? Like there was some sort of nuance here that people are sort of glazing over. But
well, I also think there's an important distinction. It's funny, Helen, even hearing you call it the open source letter, which was a nice little narrative trick, because what we're talking about are open weights for models, which have real parallels to open source.
Well, do you want to give the quick backstory on how this popped up? I think on Thursday. Was it Thursday? It was whenever Jensen joined Twitter, where he was
I
like,
was about to say, like, we'll never forget the moments.
yeah.
I actually haven't looked to see if that was the most quickly followed new account of all time. Maybe there's like a celebrity who outpaced him. But yeah, Jensen with the mic drop with an open letter, of which obviously NVIDIA was a signatory, making the case for open weight models, like being critically important to, economic prosperity and freedom versus this idea that we're just going to have a couple vertically integrated AI labs, closed models that like eat every part of the stack. And it was on the heels of like the Kimi model release and a lot of excitement around open source, and then maybe some growing like speculation that the government may shut some of this down, especially when it comes to Chinese open weight models. So a bunch of heavyweights got together, published this letter, and Helen, to your point, it was really fun to see who was on it and who was not. NVIDIA was there, Microsoft was there, Meta was there. I was very proud to see Box's little logo there. I was like, oh, we're like...
Oh, and they were like original. I think when the first, like when the Jensen letter dropped,
Listen,
right?
Being a AI thought leader, Aaron Levy, like definitely has its perks. But, of course, neither OpenAI nor Anthropic were on there, although Sam did later like tweet his support. I don't know if OpenAI is on it yet. Y Combinator was there, A16Z was there. It was kind of felt like a little bit of a random mashup, but overall, like just sort of took over the internet, and the narrative swung from like a few labs to rule them all to like, this is the future. Open source, open models are the future. And, anyone who stands in their way is against like this broader sort of like economic prosperity for this country. So I thought it was very artfully done, if somewhat random in terms of the collection and sequencing of logos.
Who is this letter for, in your opinion? Like who are they trying to reach or convince, or like what is the point of this letter?
I felt like a couple of the events that happened right before the letter that we've brought up on the pod was like the Kimi release. So like, just the reality of these Chinese models are very high performing and they're much cheaper, and they're making their way, into a lot of companies in the US. And then the open source models are getting better. There was always this, sort of like line walking of whether Meta was going to go full open source. It felt like the last big thing was like the US government made some sort of statement, right? Saying like, for the sake of national security, we have to sort of like use our domestic models and solutions that are the most secure. And that to me felt like not to run, 100 yards in a direction too quickly, but it's like, oh no, is this like a too big to fail moment where like the government knows how much we have put behind, frankly, OpenAI and Anthropic, how much investment.
Or does this fit so nicely into their anti-China narrative too, right? Like I think a lot of that was...
That too. But I think the more cynical part of me and like sort of the economic effects of what happens if OpenAI and Anthropic do not have successful outcomes or do not succeed. Like, I think there will be devastating economic effects because we have
bet the country
kind of put all of our eggs in this basket, right? I mean, like, forget just venture as an asset class. Yes, we know it's been concentrated against those two names, but like endowments, pension funds, like we have really gone all in. And so if those bets, are threatened by either something from China or open source that is just much cheaper, I think that would be bad. So maybe I'm giving them too much credit. And this is really just like a, I
guess it's just interesting that it was posted on Twitter. Like if the audience is the government, like it's just interesting that the government
announced on Twitter too, right? And I think that the AI conversation in real time is happening on Twitter.
Angela, what it did was it like galvanized the ecosystem, right? And especially I feel like the Jensen mic drop, like he's such a celebrity, but like I think what it did was it made it uncool to not be for open weights and a more open approach to AI, and like gave people this like alternate narrative to like, OpenAI and Anthropic are going to rule everything. And there was so much like pent up enthusiasm for an alternative that it created this like much bigger moment around it than if someone had actually just like gone to DC and testified. And maybe Helen, to get back to our like conversation from a couple weeks ago around like all the execs are like even ones with crazy reputations and lore and aura are joining Twitter. I do think like Jensen joining Twitter specifically for that open letter was such a validation that like this is where the AI conversation happens. Like you got to give, I guess, Elon some credit for that. Like X is where this is going. It's not happening on LinkedIn. It's not happening on Threads. It's not happening on Blue Sky. It's certainly not happening on Instagram. And so this was like kind of where they crowdsourced enthusiasm.
Yeah, and it's not happening in traditional media either. I actually don't think that traditional media can keep up with the pace of this. So
they can just sort of summarize and help us like.
Exactly. They can do a daily roundup or a morning newsletter, right?
Isn't that what's so interesting? Because as someone who is not on X, other than being like sent this post, I would have totally not known. It's not in the Wall Street Journal. It's not in, like you can sort of go through the whole week without having known this. And so it's both interesting that this is where the discourse is taking place, but also just the bifurcation of how that knowledge gets disseminated, right? It's such a small audience that, not small, but like very targeted audience that it's speaking to versus for the government, like the broad majority of its population is probably unaware of this discourse happening. So it sets a very clear delineation between the people that matter, quote unquote, and the people that don't.
Yes. I mean, I think this is why, like, coming back to Dan Primack, who I think is like super online, like he very much lives on X. So when I get Axios updates or like, see something from him, kind of like, okay, I do feel like he is in many ways bridging a couple of worlds where he is part of this like very active, fast moving conversation. It's, he's running a newsroom. And so there are like all of those checks and balances as well. And so it's almost like I have like a new value placed upon, I think, folks like him that can kind of like go between these two worlds. I'm definitely like X-brained. And then I feel like traditional media is just a little slower to catch on. So, if you're only reading that, I don't think that they're not informed takes or not well researched. It's like a couple of days later because they need to do their time, go through the proper process of like vetting,
talking to people.
Their sources.
Interesting to think about because, like, of course, in the past, things would happen really quickly and it would take some time to be covered. But there was like catch up time after big moments. And now it feels like there's no catch up time. Like by the time you publish your story 3 days later about the open letter and like how we should all be thinking about it, something else has happened in AI. And so I really do, maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay if your audience doesn't need to be like super current. But in terms of like, people who are insiders and want to stay on top of this, it makes it very challenging to like serve that audience, both like with depth, but then also, with speed. Like Axios is a great example because they do this sort of like roundup bullet point version, but longer form pieces, that's tricky.
It's interesting because this is like old news, but I saw some legislation being passed in New York that, banning data center developments. And it feels like we talked about this on the pod, like overall sort of, for lack of better term, like Gen Pop sentiment towards AI is very negative. But at the same time, it seems like we're going more and more insular into speaking to a smaller and smaller group of people than trying to bring people along. And then people get surprised, like, hey, I have to build a data center. It's so hard to convince people, but there's no effort in the interim. So it's just interesting to see.
Angela, it was also interesting because I actually thought the messaging was pretty good. Like it was actually a message around like broader economic prosperity, which is not a message I think that has like made it to mainstream audiences. But it wasn't for a mainstream audience. But maybe these are the training wheels that all of these like AI stakeholders need to learn how to come together and tell like a more positive sum story around AI. So maybe the next moment won't just be like an open letter on Twitter, and we can have a broader narrative for a broader set of people.
By the way, since I wasn't on the pod to defend my terrible taste in advertisements, I just want to say that I can't believe I was slandered for 10 minutes for showing my support for the Anthropic ad. And maybe this will be the precursor to better ads for the Super Bowl or some other large sporting event.
Well, I definitely had that thought that I feel like we are in this territory of like these open letters. Like, I think the groupings of the labs at this point, it's like the labs versus open source or Chinese models. It's like, can we admit that we're moving towards commoditization? And if we are, then what comes next? It's like differentiation and storytelling and branding. And so I'm still waiting and holding on to my hope for like the golden age of technology marketing. Maybe I'll be waiting for a long time. I feel like Kalshi had kind of a rough week. I feel like just in the week there was the CFO resigning. I saw some letter that circulated. They like threatened Netflix with a defamation suit. I guess Netflix is doing some sort of documentary on prediction markets.
I will watch that. Thank you, Kalshi, for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah, that's right. Should I send it back there? But then at the same time, you know, I feel like there's, I'm seeing a lot more like new prediction markets or platforms getting into the prediction market game. Like I think Robinhood is working on something. There's more niche like sports betting ones that are coming to market. And then there's always like the detractors that sort of like shake their moral finger at the sort of, you know, gambling and vices aspect of this that is in the background. But that was hard. And, you know, I thought of you, Ashley. I was like, well, they can get out of it very quickly by just announcing a blockbuster round or dropping some incredible revenue number. So maybe we'll see that this week as a response.
And honestly, if you don't have that, just stay silent for 2 days and the world will have moved on.
They'll moved on. Yeah, they will have moved on.
It's interesting. There's been a lot of like, it feels like a lot of punches thrown lately between Kalshi and Polymarket too, which is interesting. Like it's got like sort of like rolling in the mud a little bit. And I think Kalshi has the position of strength, especially in the US. So this past week was a little bit of a knock for them. But the thing is, like, I don't think Kalshi's users care at all, or even like are thinking about their executive team. So, you know, if this category has tailwinds, you know, as long as they can keep the business on track. It's not good to lose a CFO. So hopefully that's not like a harbinger of more bad news to come.
Yeah, that's typically, in my experience, the hardest executive departure to sort of like smooth the messaging around, which is why CFO departures are usually like quiet and sort of fading into the background. And so I guess even this one, the CFO actually departed several months ago, but only now is being reported. And so I'm sure they're bummed about that. Did you guys watch any of the incredible footage from Chase Center and YC Startup School?
Angela's eyes lit up in a way where she was like, who performed? And then you said YC Startup School, and she looked kind of sad.
Lady Gaga. I'm not on X, so of course I've seen none of this other than in our group chat. I know I was going to say Olivia Dean's concert. Like, what are we talking about? World Cup watch parties?
No, it was Sam Altman. Come on, Angela.
They have Startup School annually. They've had Startup School virtually. They have modules available online. I don't think they've ever done anything quite at this scale before, but they basically filled Chase Center and made like a very open invitation to anybody who is thinking about starting a company in the future. So it was like you had high school kids, you had operators that are currently at many companies in the Bay Area, people who traveled in for it, but it was basically like, you know, startup school, like these are the pitfalls to avoid. Here are the ways that successful founders have navigated these journeys. So I think a lot of the discourse has been, you know, anywhere from Sam Altman being like the way to close it out and it being like this, you know, sort of exciting thing. Sam Altman was the previous president of YC before Gary Tan, and to, you know, sort of like commenting on the spectacle that sort of YC has become, and sort of how mainstream like starting a startup is. And so the sort of like, you know, boomer question I had in my mind was like, would Zuck or Drew Houston, or even Brian Chesky, who's a YC founder, right? And so was Drew, but like, would they have like attended one of these events and been like, hell yeah, I'm so fired up to go start a company now? Or are they from a previous era where founders were a little more off the beaten path and like not, filling arenas?
I mean, I do think all three of those guys have always wanted to be cool. So I would say they might swing by. I mean, Mac looked shocked that I said that out loud, but like, Zuck's rocking his gold chain. I don't know.
That era of Zuck was my favorite too, though. I remember when we all saw the photo and we were like, is this AI? I loved it. It was hilarious. It was great. No, I mean, my expression is more, I am like surprised that you said that out loud, but we love to see it. I wonder if it's less about like, for me, when I see the YC Startup School event, first of all, I think like an incredibly executed event, perfect timing, great setup. Like for all of the, what did somebody say? It was the mega churchification of YC. I think that's hilarious, but I also think like one thing that mega churches are really good is driving up hype amongst like populations that really believe in something. And I think like this is an example of like a moment where YC is like trying to figure out, it seems from the outside, like YC is trying to figure out what their next phase is and how to continue to be the leader in like drawing the most talented and interesting young people into like their orbit and creating a space that is actively helpful in creating like generational companies. And I think they've tried out a bunch of different flavors of this, and this seems like as good of a path to try as any, because it certainly has all of us talking about it, and like it is definitely drawing a bunch of attention. Like, look at the weight that we hold, that we still to this day hold in Silicon Valley. All of you haters who say that we're over, we can get the most interesting people in the Valley to come talk at like a crazy, never been done before event. And I think that is like still a demonstration. I think like what that was a demonstration of lasting and continuing power. To your point, does that translate into like financial returns? Does that translate into continuing to be the hub for the next generational companies? Like, unclear.
That's a good preview to what we're going to talk about today. But yes, does it even matter?
I don't know if we need to be rooting for YC specifically, but I think we should be rooting for something that is more easy access in the Valley. Like, it's easy to hate on YC because they're like a little overdone and they've been like the center of the discourse for so many years. However, I talk to people who are outside this ecosystem a lot, and it is very intimidating if you don't live in San Francisco, if you're not tied up in like one of the like secondary cities venture ecosystems and like deep at the center of it, to really understand like who is venture for, who can start a startup, really what does it actually take to make it succeed. And I think that one thing that YC has been incredible at, both for Silicon Valley and outside of it, is really democratizing that. And that's a beautiful thing. That is like what we aspire to. Like, that's what we say like we're supposed to get via this system, is like anyone with a dream can go and make a company that matters. And so I think like, I don't know if renting out Chase Center is it. It was a very fun event, and I hope that they or someone like them wins, because I think that like we need to I love what it means to continue to give young people more insight, more access to like the insane amounts of capital and power that have developed in Silicon Valley.
Mac, it's so fascinating that that's your take, because I think like for so long YC's brand was about exclusivity, right? Like, we only take X% of total applicants. And it's like,
true, but anyone could apply.
Yeah. No, totally. And also brand and content and like vibes are much more accessible today. And I think this is also just a continuation of the barbelling we're seeing across everything, where either you are craft or you are a massive platform, right? Whether you're an incubator, whether you're a venture firm, whatever. And there isn't like that middle ground anymore. And like YC probably wasn't going to become, it's interesting because remember, they did just a couple of years ago, they killed off their growth fund. I think they made their class sizes smaller. Like, everyone's trying to figure out like what is the right way to show up when things are changing so quickly. And I think experimentation is good. And I do think like the accessibility of the YC brand and like startup lore and startup culture could be a really good thing for people who are not already in these, very specific networks and have that access. But yeah, it's just so funny to think about like YC and then like like accessibility. but also being the filter for like the very best found. It's like it's an interesting line to walk.
For sure. I think the most impressive thing about YC is that it is still around and still the best, it has the number one brand of accelerators. That is beyond impressive. You really cannot think of like, well, what would be the number 2 or number 3? And even like in San Francisco, in New York too, we joke all the time. There is a new accelerator that launches on a weekly basis. It did seem like that for a while, right? There's like a new AI one.
Or like a full-on venture studio. Do you remember that era?
That was like a year ago. Everyone was doing a venture studio.
Was it a year ago? God, okay, maybe that's been in and out of a trend. For what it's worth, I'm rooting for YC and I really want them to win. And I think Gary is incredibly strong. And if anyone can pull it off, like I do think that he has as good a shot as any. I don't think that the next YC ends up like the next player to take up the space that YC had. I wonder if it even is this model at all. Like if it is, if accelerators continue to be the thing, especially as like AI does end up democratizing a good amount of both, like we have now like a decade and a half of like really mainstreamifying like all of the conversations around company formation, especially in like startup company formation.
That's right. They're not teaching you something that you can't find on the internet.
So like now the question is like, what are the viable businesses? Which is why like we then went into this like venture studio model. But it turns out that just knowing a viable business also isn't enough to like create investor returns. It also comes down to execution and the right team and the right like continuing motivation. Like everybody wants to be a founder until they realize that being a founder just means like you're like lonely all the time, constantly overworked. You like don't hang out with your family or friends until you're like insanely successful. And even then you mostly don't. So I don't know. I think it'll be really interesting to figure out what fills that space, but I hope something does, because I think like for its many ills, I think it's the coolest thing about Silicon Valley is it's the like supposed transparency and inclusivity.
When you think about YC, like the brand is powerful, but I actually think that the network is so much more, and the network actually incentivizes them to scale. Because like I know so many founders who are even like repeat founders and they've done YC again, because if you sell software to other startups, there's your initial customer base, right? And now they have, as like tech expands beyond like a classic categories into like deep tech categories, and like they're building all of these like super high value networks within all these different sectors, and it's an unfair advantage, right? Getting started and knowing who your first 10 customers are going to be, 20 customers, 100 customers.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take like a little bit more of a dig here. I think that the criticism that I think is fair of what people are saying about YC's new version of this very scaled, accessible sort of brand and content is that it becomes so mainstream that you have people almost aspire to it as like a credential to be gained. Whereas I think there are still extraordinary founders who don't need YC for anything, except they value being on Bookface, having a distribution network of other YC founders, that are, at later company building stages than them to like sell their products to. Like, so I think pragmatically, yeah, those things are so valuable regardless of who you are. But then on the other end of that, it is starting to be more like an identity. How many cold emails do you get where it's like, people have their name and then they have their YC class in parentheses, right? It's like the same way that it's like your name and MBA, right? Some people do that, or like
tip, don't do that if you're pitching a VC. No MBAs in the subject line.
Yeah. And like, I think this is perhaps an outdated view, but it's like, to me, founders, the best founders are ones who like really didn't need to stand on any credentials and didn't need to like, they didn't need that validation of, look, I went to the right schools, or I worked at the right places, or I was good enough to be a part of this YC class. Therefore, I feel like I'm going to make the assumption that you're going to be more interested in talking to me versus just the value of my raw idea or something like that.
Maybe it's rational in this like very consensus capital era that we're in. Maybe those subject lines are really converting, and that's why people are doing them. Even if I'm a little bit like, wait, what? I need to know more than YC 26 and your MRR. Like,
yes.
That's not my favorite subject line.
One comment or one theme that maybe has been coming up quite a bit for us is sort of like this short-termism inside what we've considered one of the most patient asset classes in finance, especially when we're talking about early stage companies and startups and early stage funds in venture. Because the past few years, and I really think of that, the starting point for that being like pretty much around when ChatGPT launched, because there were a couple of things that hit. It was like AI and, maybe the second term for the Trump presidency. It was definitely this new period where it felt like we sort of everything accelerated, like the news cycle is accelerated, the expectation of sort of like faster returns accelerated. And, it really started impacting the questions that were being asked inside, like Ashley and me, we're emerging fund managers. And the DPI question comes up in like one of the first conversations, right? And years ago that was not even a thing. And the number of, young people who are joining companies and then leaving them pretty quickly, like, it felt like everything was on this accelerated timeline of watching revenue, right? Like break records of how fast you went from 0 to 100 million ARR, right? Then that changing the expectations of what should the average traction for a Series A look like all of these downstream effects of that. And then, potentially did we create this ourselves? Because that period also marked sort of like the beginning of the conversation around, gosh, it's been a really long time since we've had liquidity come back to the asset class, right? So maybe all of this short-term thinking, this short-termism is just a natural reaction to, frankly, LPs being really frustrated that they haven't seen any cash, haven't seen any DPI. And so, that's something that we wanted to dig into a little bit, whether the short-term thinking and the short-term behavior is like a good or a bad thing, or maybe completely, outside of that framework. And then sort of like what this means longer term, whether this is temporary and we'll go back to, it being longer term if there's a market correction or we learn some sort of lesson from this period, or just generally like what happens. Maybe venture is changed forever and startups are changed forever and they look more like public companies. But anyways, anyone want to kick us off?
I think I'd just say, I think it was crypto and Web3 that started this, like that sped things up. You had like NFTs, like you'd get in at the floor, suddenly your monkey was worth millions. Sorry, your ape was worth millions of dollars. But also in a more serious way, like that was one of the only places, even though Web3 was a little bit of a failed platform shift from like a venture perspective, right? It was like AI is what people hoped Web3 would be. It did actually create quite a bit of liquidity. And a lot of investors were very good at because of Coalition, we were lucky. We had a DeFi investment and got early liquidity from those tokens and skipped the J curve completely, right? And so I think that was maybe the thing that got people a little bit excited about, like, oh, you don't have to wait until you're 6, 7, 8, 9 of a venture firm to start to see some liquidity for employees of those companies, right? If there was a token. And so I think that was the genesis, but the technology didn't really go where everyone was hoping it would go. And maybe per Brian Chesky's hacker, it will. And the tokenization of the real world assets will deliver on the promise of crypto and blockchain. But I think that's what got us addicted to these like faster cycles.
Okay, so you're saying this time period, and I was saying it was like when ChatGPT launched, and you're saying, no, I think we were starting to like get our appetites for this before that.
I think from a financial standpoint, crypto kicked it off, and then AI picked up, and from a technology case standpoint, kept that going. And then AI transferred into also being like an insane revenue story and is becoming a liquidity story, right? I mean, like the SpaceX IPO, of course, we had to live through so many acquisitions where the actual exits were pretty wonky, but now everyone sees like very, very big dollar signs. And so it feels like we've moved into the sort of like financial part of that equation.
I mean, I agree with you on the Web3 crypto stuff, because to me, I always wonder if we would have had that boom without COVID. And hear me out on this one, is because people were able to just accelerate the pace of their investments and accelerate the pace of their sort of like learning about new products to invest in or products to, sort of build, because they were super online and, they're stuck in their homes, and then they're just on Zoom all day, right? That like everything sort of sped up during that process, right? The deployment periods, how many funds were raised during ZERP, where the deployment period was like a year, which we've, pulled back from. But okay. So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I revised when the starting period of that one was. So maybe that was like kind of what warmed us up and also helped get us here.
And I think we're back to those like 1 to 2 year deployment windows for funds.
I have a 3-year deployment window.
Oh yeah. No, I don't have that. But like the way people are actually, I've been hearing from LPs that like their fund managers are coming back to the well like much faster than anticipated.
This is like interesting. I don't know if there are benefits, but like another sort of like, related thing that's moving faster is like the speed of like narrative cycles, right? When we were just talking about Anthropic and OpenAI, and it's like similar, where a year ago, I feel like it was truly around a year ago where I was in the West Village and we were talking about on the pod, there was a line wrapped around like 3 blocks to get those like thinking caps, right? It felt like Anthropic had infinite aura. And now it felt like last week's, sort of news and activity around like that open weights letter, and it's sort of kind of targeting them, right? And they turn into quickly this villain. And so, in terms of the speed of cycles, nobody stays the hero or the villain for very long. Last week, we had Travis Kalanick come back with a big sort of victory lap on this new round, this mega round that he raised. And, it seems like he was a hero this whole time. And he very much, I think we love generally a redemption arc. We love these comeback stories. But, even like this concept of being canceled that I don't think people talk about anymore, but it's like, you don't really get canceled for very long. And something worse than being canceled is just like not being relevant anymore. That is related. It's like our attention spans we're like waiting for the next like dopamine hit faster.
Totally. That's what I was going to say, which is it feels like it's changing as our brains are being rewired, right? Like we're so now conditioned to getting notifications in our iPhones for text messages and email updates and social media updates that we constantly want that next dopamine hit. And there's all this research that says people are now reading like up and down versus like left and right because we're so used to just like scrolling past content. And so as our attention cycles become shorter and as we expect more of these dopamine hits, the content will come and fill up the space. And I was talking to a robotics founder last week, and I was commenting on a company that made like a big announcement on X about like a breakthrough and something. And I was like telling him, I was trying to read this paper. I put it through ChatGPT, like couldn't really figure out like what the big breakthrough was. And he was like, yeah, I don't think there was a big breakthrough, but companies feel the need to make these big announcements, to make these big posts. And so I wonder how much of it is cycles are actually speeding up versus there's just more content that's being created that also just gives the illusion of cycle. I mean, it's certainly like cycles are being sped up, but I also think there's a lot of illusion of cycles being sped up. Like the line I think of is like motion is greater than stasis, but progress is greater than motion. And I feel like maybe we're in more of like a spinning of motion than spinning of progress, if that makes sense, other than a few outliers.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like what changes this behavior or this activity is one, if there is, like a correction or if there is some devastating outcome from this activity, that could be one. But another is like, if you have a dark horse that comes out of nowhere, that's like, hey, guess what? I've been building in private and going from 0 to, $1 billion in this really short period. And I'm sort of like a counter narrative to everything that's going on. Like, I think that could be another way that we sort of question like this momentum that we're racing towards.
One of the poster companies for like the velocity is also the perfect example for that, which is OpenAI. Like there was so many years of like research and work that went into getting to the place where they launched ChatGPT, right? And so OpenAI could be looked at as this example of like, it's really important to be methodical and take your time and to really build anything super frontier and important. But instead they're and now like the poster company for how quickly can you scale and how quickly can you get to $1 trillion private company market cap. And it's a sort of, AR arms race with Anthropic. And so it's funny, like you can kind of find whatever lesson you want to find. And it feels like the narrative we're imposing on this moment is one of velocity and speed. And like how quickly can you get to this milestone, 100 million ARR, margins, durability, be damned.
But I think tech workers are feeling it too, right? Like I think one explanation, so let's look at San Francisco and the housing market. It's like, I think there is this we were joking about that New York Times article of those, tech workers feeling like, oh my gosh, like I can't survive. How am I supposed to compete with these overnight, millionaires and billionaires from who are early at these labs? I think that this expectation of, oh my gosh, if I don't, create generational wealth in the next 2 years, I'm not going to make it. Or their expectations for a lot of these things, like the timelines have just been truncated because, they're seeing it around them. And so, Angela, to your question of how much are we doing this to ourselves? Like how much is like the narrative actually just reinforcing and actually speeding up the loop is a really good question, right? Because we're chasing it and we're reporting on it, which makes it seem like it's more pervasive than perhaps it really is. It's kind of hard to break that cycle. Well, so if the cycles are like faster than ever, right, and people love a redemption arc, I feel like maybe one optimistic takeaway we could have from this is that like you just got to keep coming back and taking swings. No one is going to give you shit for that. In fact, like I feel like evidence is we've brought up many examples here where it's just like, you just got to keep fighting. And maybe that's the spirit of this, that like when you have a bad press week, it's fine. Like move on.
Yeah.
People aren't going to remember that.
Keep chasing value.
Or do as the Europeans and take a whole month off, and then you will break the cycle.
All right, let's end on that note and pretend that Great Chat will be going to Europe for the month of August, which is actually a good way to bring up the end of, what is this, season 5? All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to Great Chat. Have questions for us? Make sure to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you in September.